For the last several weeks, 4 weeks actually, we've been talking about fear. We've talked about a lot of different things when it comes to fear. And today I want to wrap up the series with talking about the fact that as Christians, we should not be afraid. I know we've started each week with this verse, 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, where it says, "For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of sound mind." The writer, the Apostle Paul, is trying to communicate to us that fear is not something that comes from God. It either comes from inside of us because of our what-if mentality, or it comes from outside of us because of attack from Satan himself. And so what I want to do today is I want to look at a couple of other passages from the Apostle Paul, since he's the one that says, he's kind of the one that wrote these words that we've been kind of diving off of each week as we've jumped into this fear, and ask the question, how exactly is it that we're supposed to not be afraid? Especially when we think about it, we realize that being afraid and having anxiety and having panic, that's kind of a normal human response, isn't it? Things happen in our lives, things go on, and there's just this natural response. But just because it's natural doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean that's what God intends for us. And so in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, probably if you've been in church for any length of time, you've heard this. It's a very well-known passage. It goes like this: "Don't copy the behavior and the customs of this world." And I want to pause there for just a minute because I want you to key in on the word behavior. He says, don't copy the behavior of the world around you. You see, we look at fear and we look at the things that are going on in our lives, and we look at the fact that it's natural, and we go, oh, well, that's just natural, so it must be okay. But Paul says, no. I need you to understand that I don't want you, and God doesn't want you to copy or be or behave like everyone else. You're supposed to behave differently. And then he goes on. He goes, don't copy the behavior and the customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. I love that. Paul always gives us not just the what not to do, but what to do. And so he says, listen, don't copy the behavior of this world, but instead allow God to transform you, to make you into something different, almost supernatural, if you will, in how you deal with panic and anxiety and fear and all these different things. He says, here's how it happens. Allow God to change the way that you think, to change your perspective, to change what begins to go through your mind when moments of fear and panic and anxiety set in. And then he gives this really cool promise. Then you will learn to know what God's will for you is, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Now, I'm going to be very honest with you. Before I did this series, before I taught through this series with Brandon, I never thought about this verse in this particular way before. I always thought about it, Christian living, and we're supposed to be more like Christ and all those things, and those are all true. But I want you to understand, as we look at it in the context of fear, and we put all these passages together and kind of compare one with the other, in essence, what's being said here is that if you act like everybody else, if you respond in fear and panic and anxiety like everyone else around you, guess what? You're never going to truly experience the will of God in your life. You're never going to experience fully what God has for you. You're never going to experience His good and His pleasing and His perfect will for your life because you are absolutely captivated with fear. So Paul says, listen, we need to change. We can't act and behave like everybody else. And it starts with changing the way that you think. So here's the big idea for today. When the world is filled with fear, when the world around us and everyone around us is filled with fear, and we know what that's like right now, don't we? I mean, we're coming out of really 2 years of people just losing their minds. When the world is filled with fear, we as Christians are to be filled with hope. We're to be filled with hope. See, Paul says our transformation from someone who just goes with the flow, someone who does what everyone else does, someone who behaves like everyone else behaves, takes place when we change the way that we think. So to understand what Paul is referring to here, to understand what Paul's talking about, we've got to head over to another passage where Paul wrote as well. And in this passage, Paul has been talking about being persecuted, about being dismissed, about being attacked, about how hard it is sometimes to actually live for Christ in this world. And those are all things where fear and panic can easily set in. And so he talks about all those things, and then he says this, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 5 through 7. God himself has prepared us for this. And as a guarantee, he's given us his Spirit. I love this. Paul says, listen, all this stuff that we're going to go through in life, all the times when something happens that we don't expect, something comes out of left field, we get hit by a 2x4 on the back of the head, and all of a sudden our world gets turned upside down. Although that may be new for you, that's not new for God. And he's been preparing you for it all along. And just in case you're like, well, he doesn't prepare me, or he didn't do this, or he whatever, he says, listen, here's the guarantee that he's done that. If you've accepted Jesus Christ, he's filled you with his Holy Spirit. And that is a promise that he's made to you, that he's going to work all these things in and through your life. And so Paul starts us all out. He says, all these things that are happening, that are difficult, that are hard, but I want to remind you that God's prepared us for it. And then he goes on. He says, so because God's prepared us for it, we are always confident, even though we know that as long as we live in these bodies, we are not at home with the Lord. So we live by believing and not seeing. And there's the key. That's how we change how we think. In Romans, remember Romans 12, Paul says we need to live, behave, or act differently. In the context of what we're talking about, it's we need to learn to not be afraid when everyone else is losing their minds. He says, if you're going to do that, you've got to change the way that you think. And then in 2 Corinthians, Paul says we aren't to live simply by what we see, but by what we believe and know to be true, even though we can't yet see it. We need to change our vision. If we're going to live not afraid, we need to change our vision to get a different perspective, because what we see informs what we think and then how we believe. The problem is that what we see may not actually be what really is. So we need to filter what we see through what we believe and know to be true, specifically about God. Hey, have you ever been fooled by your own eyes? You ever thought you saw something that wasn't actually there, or didn't see something that actually was there? Well, let me show you a couple of things that I found as I'm going through this, just to kind of give you an example of what I'm talking about. So I'm going to show you a picture real quickly. What I want you to do is when this picture comes up, you focus on the very center of the picture. So now look right in the center of that picture. Doesn't it look like the heart is growing? It's like, what in the world is going on? But you know what? It's not growing at all. It's staying still. It's not moved 1 inch. It's not a video. It's not a GIF. It's not anything like that. It is just a picture. But your eyes are deceiving you, trying to tell you that the heart is growing when it's really not. Now let me show you this other picture. Let's go ahead and put it up. Now, if you look from the left side of the picture to the right side of the picture, as you're looking at it, it's going to look like the dots are rotating, are spinning around you. But again, I promise you, it's just a flat picture. It's just a JPEG. There's no movement to it. There's no nothing. It's not moving at all. But your eyes are telling your mind, they're informing your mind, hey, that's spinning. In fact, the reality is some of you that are motion sickness may need to pause and go to the bathroom, because like literally as I'm looking at it, I'm like, whoo, that kind of throws you off. Okay, now here's the last one. This one, I want you to look at and just kind of stare at it for a second. And we're going to leave it up, and I'm going to tell you what to do, and you'll be able to see there's actually a picture in there that you don't see right at first. Okay, so here we go. Put this up. Now, just stare at it. Look at it. Just looks like it's a bunch of lines, right? Now, here's what I want you to do. Kind of squint your eyes and look to the center. Do you see it? It's a panda bear. Can you see that? Well, if you can't see it, then I'm sorry. I don't know what else to tell you, but just kind of squint your eyes. But there's a panda bear literally in the picture. And it's not like hard to see once you see it. But the reality is that our eyes are constantly playing tricks on us. So we can't just depend on our eyes. So Paul says, listen, you need to actually take what you see and filter it through the truth of what you believe about God. Okay, so what should we believe about God when it comes to fear, anxiety, and panic? Well, now for this, we're going to move to an Old Testament book called Isaiah. Isaiah has 66 chapters. It is a big book. And Isaiah the prophet is writing, in fact, he writes 2/3 of the book is about what's going to happen in the future to the nation of Israel. And it's about them, losing their homes, being taken captive. It's about loved ones being killed. It's about them losing their nation. And then about 2/3 of the way through the book, in chapter 41, he immediately shifts gears and he begins to talk about God in the midst of all of this that's happening and how they don't need to be afraid. They don't need to fear. They don't need to have panic. Even when this happens, God is still going to be there. And he gives us 5 things that we can hold on to and we can believe about God. Isaiah 41 verses 10 through 13. Don't be afraid, for I am with you. Don't be discouraged. I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will hold you with my victorious right hand. See all your angry enemies lie there, confused and humiliated. Anyone who opposes you will die and come to nothing. You will look in vain for those who tried to conquer you. Those who attack you will come to nothing. For I hold you by your right hand. I, the Lord your God, and I say to you, don't be afraid, for I am here to help you. Man, doesn't that just like give you goosebumps? In the midst of all of this despair that Isaiah is prophesying and saying it's coming, he pauses and God speaks through him and he says, listen, if you know my name, if you have faith, if you believe in me, you don't have to be afraid, even in the midst of all of this. And then God shares 5 powerful things with us, and I'm going to share them with you today. First of all, he says, I am with you. So we believe that God is with us in the middle of your crisis, in the middle of your pain, in the middle of your panic, in the middle of your fear. You are not alone. I don't care if you feel alone. I don't care if it looks like you're alone. You have the belief. You don't look just with your eyes. You look with your faith. And your faith says that God is with you. God is with us. Then he says, I am your God. He's for us. God's not some antagonist in the story of our lives trying to make it miserable and throwing stuff at us to see how we're going to respond. God says, listen, I'm with you in this and I am for you. I am working all things. I am working in you and through you, and I want to do things in you. And then he says, I want to strengthen you, I want to help you, and I want to hold you up. So God is with us, God is for us, and God will help us. When you're in the midst of that panic and you don't think there's any way out, that's when you go to God, and he will help you through it. He'll give you strength, he'll hold you up, he'll make you stronger, whatever. He will help you through it. So God is with us, God is for us, God will help us. And the next one, I love, he spends like 2.5 verses going, where are those people that were opposing you? I removed them. They're lying on the ground, confused and humiliated, because God fights for us. Sometimes we feel like nobody is in our corner. Nobody's defending us. Nobody is watching out for us. But folks, if you have faith in God, God says to you, I will fight for you. I'm with you. I'm for you. I will help you. And I will fight for you. And then the last one, I love the way that he phrases it. He says, I will hold and I will take your right hand. If you have kids, you know this. You know, you're walking through Walmart, you're walking through a store, and your kid's getting a little distracted, and you reach down and you take their hand and you guide them. You lead them to where you want them to go. So that's the last thing that we can believe. We can believe that in the midst of all this stuff, God's still going to lead us. He's still going to take our hand, and He's still going to walk us through, because God's with us. He's for us. He'll help us. He fights for us, and He will lead us. Now, what I want to do is I want to share with you something, but I want to put it in a first-person perspective. So I want to just write it out this way, or put it, maybe just put it on the screen while we're talking about this. And I want to read this to you, but then I want you to take this and make this proclamation yourself. Maybe you need to write it down and put it on an index card and put it in your car, what is it, the sun visor or whatever it is. Or maybe you need to put it on your mirror in the morning so it's the first thing that you see, or you need to put it in your phone. But here's what I would encourage you to do. Take these 5 truths, and I'm going to put it together like this. And here we go, okay? I believe God is with me and He is for me. I believe that God will help me, fight for me, and lead me. So I am not afraid. I believe God is with me and He is for me. I believe that God will help me, fight for me, and lead me. So I am not afraid. Because folks, when the world is filled with fear, we can be filled with hope, because our faith gives us a better perspective. I really hope that these 5 weeks have been encouraging to you, uplifting to you, and instructive to help you learn how to overcome fear. And I'd like to ask you to do something. First of all, I'd like to ask you to put this little statement that we put together, put it to practice. When fear comes your way, just say that. I believe that God is with me and He's for me, and I believe that God will help me and fight for me and lead me, so I don't need to be afraid. But I'd also encourage you to share this with a friend. You know, there are people in our world who are constantly filled with fear and anxiety and panic. And maybe you just writing a little note or sending a little email or sending a little link might change somebody's life. And that's what it's about, isn't it? Because as Christians, we're not called to be selfish. We're called to be a light to our world. So be a light in a world filled with fear. Be someone that radiates the hope of Jesus Christ. We'll see you next week as we start a brand new series.